Hello, my name is Ty Kaiser, and today me and my friends Zach Thomas and Joel Epstein will be presenting to you the classical time period in what is hopefully 10 minutes or less. We're going to be presenting this information to you by empire. The four dominant empires during the classical time period were, respectively, the Romans, the Han Dynasty, the Greek kingdoms, and the Persian Empire. So, to kick us off, here is Zach Thomas presenting the Persian empires.
Hi, I'm Zach Thomas. I'm going to be presenting the Persian empires. Persian Empire was a collection of nation-states and hamlets conjoined into one empire under King Cyrus, as it was a monarchy. Persia created the model for most land empires of the time period, with the exception of the Han Dynasty, who were isolationists. Under the Persian Empire, conquered states were allowed to keep their land because the Persian kings did not want to have any revolts, and they wanted to keep the people happy. Also, they could tax more if the people were happy. Something interesting about the Persian Empire is that it had no slaves, which is very unique to empires of its day. Slavery was not something of an issue until about 2,000 years later with the abolition of slavery in European empires and the Americas. Also, Persia had a very good trade system with their own monetary values and a good infrastructure with very good economic policies enforced in its cities. Lastly, Persia had a very good messaging system. It was very interesting because it resembled America's Pony Express system of the 19th century. In the end, though, Persia fell to Alexander the Great of the Greek kingdoms, which leads me into my next speaker, Joel Epstein.
Thank you, Zach. I'm Joel Epstein, and I'm going to present the Greeks to you. So, whenever the Greeks first started, they were a whole bunch of city-states, but were then put together to make one Greek empire. But that happens later on, so let's push that aside for right now. What happens right now is the achievements. So, the basis for Western government was one of the biggest achievements that they had. They had a democracy, and that's been seen nowhere else in the world at this time. Everybody either had a kingship, a dictatorship, or a theocracy where the priest ruled the city. So they also created the language for politics that we use today. So whenever we're speaking about politics, that sort of language that we use, that's came from the Greeks 2,000 years ago. And then we have the Persian War that kind of caused Greek nationalism. And that's interesting because nationalism has never been seen before in Greece. And it's actually one of the first places that we see nationalism started in history. Now, this man called Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great came by, conquered Greece, and after he conquered Greece, he made people feel obligated to serve in the military, which is how he was able to conquer Egypt, the Persian Empire, and half of the known world. While he was in Egypt, actually, he founded the city of Alexandria, which contained one of the libraries that contained the most knowledge at the time. Actually, a cool fact is that whenever you entered the city of Alexandria, you were searched for certain documents that had never been seen before, and they would then copy it down and put it in that library in Alexandria, and then they would give it back to you after they were done. And it was really good. Everything was cool in Greece and everything, the Greek Empire, but it all kind of fell apart after the death of Alexander the Great at age 32 when his three generals split up his empire into three different sections. Now, without further ado, Ty C. Kaiser with the Roman and Han Empire.
Hey, it's me again. Thanks, Joel. So, I'm going to be presenting first the Roman Empire, probably the more famous of my two civilizations, the other being the Han Dynasty. The Roman Empire was very special because it was a very longevous empire within the Western world, and it also contributed many of its philosophies, ideas, and architectural styles to even today's world. Roman history is respectively split up into two sections. The first section is the Republic. The second section is the Empire. Now, while these might sound like Star Wars, they are most certainly not. The Republic is where most of the actual conquest happened. All of the conquest that happened during this time fueled the Roman Empire greatly, to the point where Rome became almost dependent upon its conquests. The backbone of the Roman legion was called the farmer soldier. Well, as time progressed, Rome's campaigns began to grind to a halt. Things began to stabilize, and military power was reduced. This was the subsequent death of the farmer soldier. Due to improper leadership and bad economic policies, an income gap formed within the Roman Empire. This income gap became so large that the poor would go as far as to sell their farms, homes, anything they had, the clothes off their backs, and even their votes. This led to a very corrupt Roman Senate, and even with this corruption, three people eventually came out on top and formed the triumvirate. This triumvirate included Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was one of the most famous emperors ever to live in Rome. He eventually killed off his two counterparts and was named dictator for life in Rome. He restabilized the empire, strengthened its infrastructure and borders, and led even more campaigns to expand the empire while still not basing the economy solely on conquest. Now, Rome also had a very complicated series of trade systems that benefited the empire greatly. But there is evidence that they traded with another great empire, one to the east, the Han Dynasty. This Han Dynasty came after the Qin Dynasty. The reason the Qin Dynasty fell was that they had grown corrupt, lazy, and incompetent. So, Liu Bang, a Chinese rebel, decided that they had lost the mandate of heaven and led a revolution. Liu Bang then went out to found the Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty was known as a golden age. Steel working was invented. Philosophy, literature, and poetry became evident once again. And Liu Bang put in place something that had never been seen before in recorded history: meritocracy. Speaking of which, the Han is also where we first see from the Shinji the state-funded history. But Liu Bang's new policies included mass reforms for this meritocracy movement, such as the scholar Gentry tests. These exams were based entirely off of Confucian literature, and people would study years and years and hours for these exams, for the chance to rise up in the court. What was very unique about this is that you could rise based upon your own merit, not upon your bloodline or your riches. This made the Han a very effective dynasty, and this effectiveness was shown by the maintaining and the expansion of Chinese borders. During this time, the Great Wall was also started. This wall would be later continued by other dynasties, and was almost the Chinese project for 1,000 years. So now we are finished.